Hello, it's Elena. You also might know me by the nickname Hairless Emotion on Instagram. And today I'm going to show you how to create this animation from scratch. Let's just have a quick look at how it all animated. So we have three main parts here. The first one is this little sphere, and then we have this sort of top part and how can we call it, like sort of the leg of the Y. And there's quite a lot of things happening here, but we're just going to start creating, and you will see that it's not all that difficult to animate it. So let's create the main composition. It's going to be 1000 by 1000 pixels and 6 seconds long. And I'm going to call it the main composition. Okay, great. So here we have three parts, as I already mentioned. So let's just start with the most simple one. So I'm going to do the sphere. For that, I'm going to create another composition. And we're going to call it circles animation. It's going to be 1000 by 1000 pixels, and let's make it 30 seconds long. Here, let's create a shape layer. We don't need the fill, we just need the stroke, and we can make it like 900 pixels. Let's name our layer. It's going to be circle number 1, and I'm going to increase the stroke width up to 18. And basically what we want to do here, we just want to increase the scale of this circle, very linear. We don't need any easing, but we don't want to increase it from the center. I want to move the anchor point to the left, and it's going to increase this way. So let's go inside and move the anchor point of the group 1 and put the keyframes on the scale. So it's going to take 4 seconds, this animation. I'm putting the keyframe at the 0 and at the 4 second, and it's going to increase from 0 to 100. That's great. And now we just need to simply create a few copies. So let's say 20 copies should be enough. And I'm going to use the Rift script to shift those layers by 30 frames. You can do it manually if you want, but this is just make it faster. And now we have this sort of looped circles animation. And let's nest our circles animation in the new composition. I'm going to call it sphere. And here we already have our circles. So I'm going to duplicate this 2 times. And we are going to rotate these layers. I'm going to use the numbers that I used in the challenge, but you can, rotate it any way you like. And to make it a little bit more, I don't know, kind of psychedelic, I'm going to put the exclusion mode. So those lines, they kind of cut themselves on the intersection of those layers. So we are pretty much done here. We don't want to use the beginning of this animation. We want to use this part where it's already sort of looped. So let's trim our comp somewhere starting from the second 4, and we need 6 seconds. So I'm going to cut it somewhere around 10. And this is done. Let's move on to the next part. It's going to be our top part. So I'm going to create a new composition and call it top. It's going to be 1000 by 1000 pixels, and we can also make it 6 seconds long. We don't need a very long comp. And let's create a circle here, a shape layer with a circle. We're going to use the fill and the stroke and put it 700 pixels. I'm using the primitive script here. It let me create the shape layers much easier and faster and set those kind of settings straight away, but you can also just create it with normal shape tools, something like this, and then you can change the size and do all the settings. And I'm also using the swatch rules script to set the colors and the stroke, that just kind of sort of like Illustrator style panel that makes things easier as well. So this is going to be, we're going to create some kind of donut here. I'm going to organize these things a little bit, duplicate this layer, put it down and decrease the scale down to 45%. So we have this donut. I'm also going to increase the scale width up to maybe 4. We can adjust these things later. So what we want to do is we want to cut this upper part. To do that, we are going to apply a trim path for the first group, set it to 50% and 90 degrees. Almost there. The only thing we just want to do now is to add the merge path and set it to subtract mode. So we are sort of subtracting this little circle from this big one. And it looks good. So we're going to use this layer as a stroke on top of our top animation, and also as a matte layer. So I'm going to name this circle stroke and circle matte. And then in a matte layer, we will not need the stroke, so I'm just simply removing it. And the same in the circle, in the circle stroke, we don't need the fill. And I'm just going to hide these layers for now. We don't need them anymore. And let's create another ellipse and make it the comp size. Yeah, we're going to use the fill and stroke. So let's just create it and make the fill black and the stroke white and make it, let's say 6. I'm just going to check the values that I have used here. Yeah. 4 and 4. Okay, great. I'm going to set it to 4 then. And we're going to call this layer repeater number 1. So what we want to do here is, obviously we want to add a repeater. Right now it's repeating our circles from the left to the right, sort of offsetting them by 100 pixels. That's not exactly what we want. And also we don't want the circles to be so big, so I'm going to decrease the scale to 21% and increase the amount of copies to 45. And we don't want to offset it by the position, so I'm just removing these values and setting the rotation to 10. So right now we don't see anything happening because it's basically rotating around itself. We don't see the copies, and to see them we need to change the position of the layer that we want to repeat to minus 250. Now it looks good. If we turn on the stroke and the matte layers, we're going to see that it's pretty much fitting our circle, so we don't need to change anything here. We're just going to use the circle matte as an alpha matte for our repeater, because we don't want to see this whole part. And now we just need to animate our repeater. Okay, so I'm going to set the keyframes on the anchor point and the scale. We're going to animate these two values, and it's going to change somewhere in the middle, so at the 3 seconds. And we can just move our anchor point maybe minus 350. Yeah, that should be enough. And we're going to unlink the height and width of the scale because we just want to change the first value down to 10. And here we're just returning our keyframes back to normal. I'm also going to use the easing preset in the motion extension that I set to 25 in and 25 out. You can also just edit it in the graph editor if you want. And let's see what's happening now. So our circles sort of move inwards. Okay, that's great. And now we just need to duplicate this layer, and it's going to be repeater number 2, circle matte number 2. And we don't want it to move inwards, we just want it to stay out there. So we're going to remove those keyframes, and I'm going to just apply the invert effect. You can just simply change the stroke and fill colors, but this is just easier. So the only thing I want to do now is I want to rotate these layers. I'm going to open repeater 1 and repeater 2 rotation, check that the anchor point is here in the middle, and we're going to set the rotation values. I think we can rotate it to 180 on the one of the repeaters and minus 180 to another, so they rotate different directions and it adds a little bit more dynamics. Great, we are done with the top and with the sphere. Now it's the most complex part. It's our kind of DNA looking leg of the Y. So let's create a new composition and call it lines. It's going to be lines number 1 and 1000 by 1000. Well, actually we can make the width down to 600. We don't need 1000, and I'm going to make it 30 seconds long. Okay, great. And now let's create a shape layer with the path, with the, you know, like just sort of a line. It's going to be 320 pixels wide. I'm going to call it line main. And what we want to do here is I'm going to increase the stroke up to 20. So we want to repeat this line. So it's going to be a couple of copies, and we want to move the line from left to the right, and all those copies, all those you know, like lines down here, they're going to do exactly the same thing. They're just doing it with a delay. So let me show you how we're going to do this. I'm going to create a new null layer. You can create it just, you know, like new null layer, and I'm going to call it control. And we will need some sliders on top of this control, because this is the layer where we're going to put all the keyframes to do all of our animation on this layer. So we need those slider controls to, you know, put the keyframes on top of them. So the first slider is going to be delay, then we're going to do the offset Y, and we will need position X slider and position Y slider. I'm going to explain later what all of these things for, and I'm going to set these values to what it should be. Okay, great. So now we have our, I'm just going to lock this layer over here so we can, you know, like equip our values. And we have the line main, and right now it's in the middle. I want to move it up here, but I don't want to change position right here. I don't want to always go to these values. So I'm just going to connect this position to these values. So we click Alt or Option button, and we're going to write a very simple expression here. So we create an X value, we connect it to position X. We create an Y value, and we connect it to position Y. Square brackets, X, Y. Great. Now our line main is controlled by these sliders over here. And what we want to create is going to be our duplicated layer. We call it line copy 1, bring it down. I just want to do one thing straight away, because this is the path, and in case we want to change this path later, we want all the subsequent copies to follow the initial path. So I'm just going to sort of make it you know, connected. So if as many copies we create, they're all going to be the same as this path over here. And now we need to change our position copy, because right now they're both connected to the slider and they just, you know, follow these values. But that's not what we want. We want this copy to be delayed version of this animation. So I'm going to go into our expression, and we're going to write another expression. Let's delete this one. So I'm going to create a few variables. We need a variable called delay, and we're going to connect it to delay slider over here, and we're going to create an offset Y. Sorry, need to be a one word. We can't put spaces here. So I'm going to connect this to our offset Y slider, and What we want to do now is we want to create another variable, call it above, and we want to read the value of the position of the layer above. But so right now it reads the position of the line main, but that's not what we want, because if we create more copies, they're all gonna read the position of the line main, and it's not gonna help us in any way. So we want to read what's the address of this layer, and to do that we use the index. So we use the index of our current layer -1, so that's going to give us the position of the layer that is above us right now. And now just the last line, since we're going to animate this value, we want to read what is this position at any given time, not just, you know, like the constant value of it. So we're going to use the valueAtTime method, and we need to put some argument here. What kind of time do we want to read it? So I'm going to write time minus framesToTime delay. So what does that mean? If we animate this slider, so let's say we create some animation from 250 to 350. So this expression, this layer, reads the position of this layer minus 6 frame delay. So as you can see, the values are delayed. So this value is what it was 6 frames ago at this layer. I hope that's clear enough. The only thing we want to do now is that we want to offset this line by Y position with the value that we set here. So I'm going to simply add it here using our variable that we set earlier. And this is obviously not, oh, it has to be 0. And now what we need to do is just to simply create, I'd say 13 copies. I think 13 copies should be enough. And we want to animate our offset Y and our position X. So we want to shift this line from left to the right. I'm going to set the keyframe at 1 second, and it's going to be 350. So what happens now is that this line shift and all these lines that just follow with the delay of 6 frames. And we also want to move it back. We could set the second keyframe, the third keyframe over here, but I'm just going to simply apply the loop out expression with a ping pong argument. You can just write it down here, but I have it set up in the keybar to make it faster. And now we just need to animate the offset Y. So we kind of want these lines to squeeze a little bit and then go back to its normal condition. So I'm going to set the first keyframe over here. We don't want to use this part of the animation because it takes some time to, for delay to start working properly. So we're going to use our animation just starting from the second 3. Going to decrease this offset down to 40, and here it's going to come back to 60. Okay, this looks great. It's just a little bit linear now, so we want to apply the easing preset, and now it's more smooth, and it's exactly what we wanted to create. Now let's nest our lines number 1 in the new composition, and we're going to call it bottom. And what we want to cut this layer because we don't want to use this the beginning of the animation, so I'm just going to trim this with the Alt and square bracket shortcut. And let's just duplicate this layer, so because we will want to use 2 copies. And we're also going to create lines number 2, and the only difference between lines number 2 and lines number 1 is that the stroke is going to be 5 pixels, so it's going to be over here. And now what we want to do is that we want to cut, this middle part of our lines number 1. Let's come back here, let's bring our lines number 2 and hide it for a moment. So as you can see, those lines, they don't use the fill opacity, they have some kind of stroke style. So to do that, we are just going to apply layer styles, set it up to stroke, choose white color inside, and decrease the fill opacity down to 0. Okay, looks great. The only thing we need the matte layer right now. So let's copy lines number 1 and create lines matte number 1. I don't like how things are arranged here. Yeah, that works better now. So in lines matte, what we want to do is we just want to simply change the shape path. It's super easy since we already set up the expression that make all the lines follow our main line. I'm going to use the guides to see how much do I want to decrease this path, and with the pen tool we are simply going to move the ends of this path. Okay, looks good. And let's bring our lines matte here. I'm just duplicating this layer and sort of substituting them so I don't have to cut it all again. And I'm going to duplicate lines matte again and hide it for a moment. So right now we have, also we need to increase in the lines matte, we need to increase our stroke, let's say up to 40, so it cuts our layers properly. And here we don't want this lines matte to have the layer styles. Let's delete the layer styles. We are going to use the alpha inverted mode of the matte layers. So right now it already looks good. Let's return our lines number 1, also put the alpha inverted matte. So what's happening now is those lines are sort of on top of our layer. So we want to flip horizontally those layers. So if you open the scale, you see what's happening. We put the negative values on the X. You can simply just type, negative values here, or you can use the flip horizontally function of After Effects. I just put it in the key bar to make it, easier for me to reach this. And this looks good. The only thing we need is to apply our lines number 2 now. And so lines number 2 are a little bit too long. We need to cut them as well. So I'm going here and we're going to decrease this shape a little bit. Again, I'm using the guides. Maybe something a little bit smaller. And the pen tool. Looks great. The only thing we need to do is we need to also flip the lines to horizontally. So I'm just going to show you how would I do this. I'm just going to type here the negative value and perfect. It's not really that difficult. I had to experiment a lot while creating it, like with flipping things and, see what works best. And I'm going to trim this composition because we don't need to use this whole 30 seconds length, so I'm going to just trim it from 3 to 9 seconds. Looks great. And let's come back to the main composition, and now we just need to assemble this whole thing together. So I'm going to bring our sphere here and the top layer and the bottom layer. Well, looks kind of random now. Let's decrease our bottom a little bit, and also we're going to turn it 180 degrees because when it's squeezed, we want to squeeze the upper part rather than the bottom. And I think I'm going to use 74%, something like this. Shift it a little bit down, and the upper part, we don't want to make it smaller, we want to keep it 100%. This looks good. And the sphere, we're also going to make it smaller and bring it up here. So now the only thing I want to do is that I want this upper part and the sphere is to move down when, you know, like the bottom part sort of squeeze. So I'm just going to put the position keyframes here and, you know, shift it down and then back up. I'm just going to use the clone keyframes script, apply the easing so it moves more smooth now. Okay, that's great. And also we want to use the mask on this layer, on the bottom layer, so we don't want to see this upper part. I'm going to invert the mask and check that everything looks good here. And the only thing I'm going to do here is just to apply the rotation on the sphere. I'm going to set it to -1 full rotation. And it's all done. This was a little bit longer tutorial than usual, and I hope you found it useful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below, and see you next time. Bye bye.